Hey guys, it's Zane, and today we're gonna talk about budblast. Okay, so budblast is a very common problem, and I think everybody faced budblast at least once in their lifetime. So today let's talk about what is actually budblast. Well, we call budblast a phenomenon which is happening with the buds. As an orchid flower spike is grown, buds are created, and as these buds are actually grown, they start to actually wrinkle and they just fall off. For example, on this flower spike, I have two buds blasted, but I will talk about why is this actually a flower spike which has bud blast things happening. So at first, let's talk about what is the normal thing for a orchid flower spike when it's actually developing. So here is my mini Phalaenopsis mount, and it has a flower spike right now. And as you can see on this flower spike, there are like two buds which are blasted. So as a flower spike is grown, at first the spike is just a branch, let's say, and as the branch is grown, it's longer and longer, and as it's elongating, tiny little buds are actually appearing on the sides of the branch, and as the buds are appearing, they start to plump up, they start to get bigger. As they are growing, after a time when they feel they are big enough and they are ready to open, they open up, the flowers are formed. After a time, the flowers will wilt, and for each type of orchid, the wilting time is slightly different. For example, for Phalaenopsis hybrid orchids, it can be a really long time, like half a year even, but there are some flowers in the orchid world which are, for example, open for just a couple of hours, which is like a pretty short time. So this was the normal rate of growing spikes, but what happens if there is actual bud blast happening? So in the case of bud blast, the buds will be wilted and shed prematurely, which means that the flower spike is growing still, the buds there, some might be actually open, but some buds can actually wilt and just fall off, just like that, without no apparent reason. And as you can see on this flower spike, I have here this first bud which is forming there nicely, but then I have here this brownish spike. Well, this is brown and wrinkly because it is a blasted bud there. And I have another one on the other side which is really tiny. I think you can see it there. So I have these bud blast happening on this orchid because it's on a mount, and I was pretty neglecting this mount, so it didn't have enough energy. So the reason behind this bud blast is me not watering it now. So this is how bud blast actually looks like. The buds are not green anymore, or not the color that they will be, but they will turn yellow or brown, and after it they will be shed and they will fall. Or even they can remain on the spike, but they will be actually brown and not developing at all. So as the buds are actually grown on the spike, a normal development is when they are plumping up. The surface of them is, sometimes they can be shiny, but definitely they will be plump, and they will be getting plumper and plumper with every day. But in the case of bud blast, when the bud blast is happening, they will be stopped growing. At first they will be rather a yellowish color. They will turn from green to yellow. After it, the bud will be more wrinkly than the other healthy buds on the spike, and after a time you will actually be able to see the size difference that the other buds are developing, and there is this tiny wrinkly bud just hanging there and not doing anything. So this is how bud blast actually looks like. But the more important thing here, the reason behind bud blast. There are three different reasons here, which I think these are the most common reasons. So let's start with the first reason, and this is the environmental change. So the environmental change with orchids, it can be a big thing, because orchids, since they are usually epiphytes, that means they are living, let's say, in air, because they are attached to tree trunks and branches. So their metabolism is actually slower than regular plants' metabolism, because they collect rainwater and stuff like that. So the orchids are slow plants, not fast plants which always have like food in the ground. So orchids are slow. And since this is how orchids live, they need a storage of energy, and they have a pretty good system with playing around with this energy and stuff, because they need constantly energy, but they might not getting constantly water, stuff like that. So there is this whole thing about orchids. Therefore, if an environmental change is happening around the orchid, they have to react to that environmental change. And by environmental change, I can mean like anything. For example, environmental change can be when you bring an orchid home from the store or from the supermarket, because the environmental there is totally different than your home environment and your indoor environment. So orchids need to react to this environmental change, and since they don't want to be like super stressed and stuff like that, this environmental change will be a sort of a shock for the plant. It can be a bigger shock or a smaller shock, but definitely the plant will feel it. And as this shock is happening, the environmental change is happening, the plant will concentrate on this environmental change. It wants to keep up with this change, it wants to keep up in this new environment, it wants to grow and stuff like that. So at first the orchid will need to convert all of the energy what it has into this environmental change thing. It needs this energy for the spike to develop the buds, which is a huge amount of energy. And also when an environmental change is happening, if an orchid has a spike but there is an environmental change happening also, and the orchid needs energy for existing as well, that's just too much for the plant. So energy will be, let's say, cancelled to create the buds. Okay, the second reason can be, well, a stressful orchid. Well, it's kind of the same energy saving mechanism, because if an orchid is stressed, it can be like anything. It can be pest, a virus, an infestation. It can be a fungal infection, it can be a bacterial infection, it can be basically anything happening with the orchid. And if the orchid is not healthy enough, buds can be cancelled, because the orchid needs its energy to actually be healthy again. The orchid wants to live. This is the most important thing in the orchid's life. It wants to live. And that's why when an orchid is stressed or it's sick, the energy won't be put into growing buds, but rather it will be put into creating a healthy plant again. So if you care for an orchid properly and it enjoys its life, it creates a spike. But then something's happening, something is not right in its care, the buds can be cancelled. And this is the second reason why bud blast can happen. And the third reason here can be a genetic code thing. So as you might know, Phalaenopsis orchids are the most hybridized orchid, I think, out there, and there are numerous Phalaenopsis hybrids, especially complex hybrids, because these hybrids in the stores are really far away from the species in the wild, because the wild species will rather have not so tall and not so long spikes, and they will have less flowers. And these ones which are created for our homes, they were created for us humans. We need flowers, we need long flower spikes, because they are showier. And this is this, let's say, opposing idea between the species and the hybrids, because some hybrids were hybridized to create these long spikes. As the flower spikes are created in these hybrids, the genetic code of them, the genetic pool of them, tells them to create long flower spikes with lots of flowers, lots of blooms. But the actual orchid can't keep up with that many blooms on one spike, with that many blooms in general, in like more spikes or whatever. So these buds will be cancelled, and bud blast will happen if you have that kind of an orchid which just cannot keep up with that many flowers as it wants to create. Well, it can happen. It is a rarer case, but this can happen definitely. And the last thing here, how to avoid it. Well, the reasons can tell you actually how to avoid it, because if an environmental change is causing the bud blast, you have to actually avoid the environmental change. For example, on this orchid, the reason for bud blast was that I was keeping this orchid close to a window, and that window was rather cool, but as you can see, the spike was getting really long and these buds were really close to the really cold window, and I didn't want these buds to actually have a cold damage or something, so I moved the whole plant to a place where there is no window too near to the orchid. After I moved this plant, they were experiencing warmer temperatures, so this was an environmental change for the orchid and they blasted. You can avoid stressful situations for an orchid if you care for it properly, check for pests and stuff like that. If you care for it properly and you care for it to be healthy like every time, you can avoid bud blast caused by stress. And while you cannot avoid bud blast on those orchids which just want to bud blast because they are creating too many buds, it's in their genetics, so you cannot do like anything about that, but you can actually encounter with an orchid which is just like that. Okay guys, so this is my video for today and hope you liked it. If you liked it, click on the like button, leave a comment down in the comment section below. Also, you can subscribe to this channel and don't forget to click on the bell button so you will get notifications every time I post. And you can visit my new Instagram account, and also don't forget to visit my other channel as well and subscribe to that as well. So see you next time. Bye guys.